Hey everybody, today we're going to be looking at how to do height blended materials in a slightly more advanced way than when you just use one of the height maps. As you can see, here's an example of what it is, and it takes into account the height maps of both materials. So the high points on one height map will actually blend through the low points of the other height map. And this can be done just naturally, where you just offset both of them and just let it be what it is, or you can use either image texture or vertex painting in order to control how they blend together. So here we have just it height blended, and if we have this, then we can actually paint where we do and don't want the different materials to appear. So say if we want a pile of gravel over here, we can really layer it up, even turn the strength up, and really have a nice pile of gravel, and then we can completely paint it out of the texture over here because maybe we don't want any. So you both have a lot of control, and as you can see, it also appears in the low spots first in a very natural way, where it blends both individual rocks on this texture with the overall shape of this texture. And you can do this with any two materials. This technique does not have to be used with anything specific. So let's go ahead and hop into a new project file and see how it's done. First, I'm going to delete everything, and then we're going to grab a plane. Scale it up by 2, and we're going to duplicate it out just so we can pull in both materials. I'm going to use the Polyhaven add-on to just quickly pull in materials. You don't need it though, you can also just build them manually first. For this, I'm going to use a larger rock material. Let's try... let's use rock wall as 1. We'll switch over to Eevee as well. And then I want kind of a gravelly or smaller material that would make sense for it, kind of blending into the other one. Let's go ahead and use river pebbles. Now we'll hop over to the shader editor. And I'm also going to scale up our pebbles by maybe 2, so they're slightly smaller. Now we'll grab this entire shader from the second plane, click Ctrl-C, and paste it into the first one. So now we have both shaders together. We can also just delete the second plane now. There's 2 different ways we can go about it, where we can either mix it before the BSDF shader, and that will technically be more performant, but it can lead to a lot more node spaghetti and be a lot more complicated to do. So for this, I'm going to blend after the shader, so it's just simpler. So we're going to need a mix shader node, and we're going to plug our first shader into one socket and our second shader into the other socket. Then we're going to need both height maps. So if we drag it out, let's just add a math node, and we're going to set it to multiply add. You can also do a multiply node and then a math node. That is functionally the same thing. This just contains it into one node. Let's duplicate that and also find the second height map. Now we also can only use one displacement node because if you look, the displacement is done separately to the surface. We have to blend both the height maps together and the shaders together separately. So let's move the displacement out and the mix shader out so they're right next to each other, because those are the nodes we're going to be going into. We can plug our mix shader into our surface output, and now let's blend our height maps together first. So for this, we're just going to get a maximum node. What this will do is it will simply take whichever of these 2 values is higher. And we're going to plug both of our multiply add nodes into it, and then that will go into the height of our displacement. Next, we're going to need another math node, and we're going to set this to greater than. Then we will plug our multiply add into both sockets on that as well, and that will go into our mix shader node. So what we now have is both of our height maps being plugged in and mixed together, and we'll show whichever height map has the higher value on it. The multiply add also functions as a offset and strength setting. So if we change the multiply to 1, this will not change anything. And we set the add end to 0. And now we can move both height maps up and down, as well as change the strength of them. Now the strength doesn't seem to be working correctly, but that's because we don't have any geometry to work with. So let's go into edit mode and subdivide it a whole bunch of times. Now we can turn the strength of our different height maps up, and also it looks like we've inverted it. We've got the wrong height maps working on the wrong objects. So let's invert our greater than. And this looks like it's now working correctly. So we can move both of our materials up and down, as well as increase or decrease the strength that they both have. And we can also use the scale and mid-level to do that for both materials at the same time. So what we can do is basically adjust how much one material clips through the other. And it very much looks like we have two separate planes, each with its own material on it, that we're just moving through each other, which is pretty much exactly what we want. If we want to control this with either a texture or vertex painting, what we can do is actually just change this offset differently for each location. And to do that, we can just add another add node. We'll again set it to 0 so it doesn't change anything. And now let's go into vertex paint mode. We have the attribute named attribute, so let's add that to our shader editor by adding an attribute node. And in the name, type attribute. Make sure you match the capitalization and spelling that it has in this menu. In fact, we can even change the name of this if we want. So we can change it from attribute to, say, gravel mask. And then as long as we spell it exactly the same here, it should still work fine. So let's plug the factor out of our attribute into the value. And that shouldn't change much because our attribute mask probably is either black or white. So let's make sure we just paint the whole thing black just to make sure it doesn't change anything yet. Let's turn our strength up to 1. Alright, and now that our mask is all black, you can see it's about the same as it was with or without it. Like, it shouldn't change anything. And now what we can do is get a smaller brush, maybe turn the strength down some so it's more granular adjustment. And in order to make this change a larger amount, because currently if we change it all the way up to white, it goes up about that far. We can also add a add. In fact, let's add just another multiply add node in here. And this means we can now move our mask up and down in the same way we move both textures up and down. So if we increase the multiply, you can see that our mask actually gets stronger and weaker. And if we change the add end, we move it up and down in the exact same way. So let's move it so we get slightly below our other material as well as slightly above. And now what we can do, if we paint this back down again, we can change our strength down to something pretty low, like maybe 0.2 or 0.3. And now we can just really gently paint it in wherever we want it. And we get this really natural blend where it really looks like our tiny stones have just kind of piled into the cracks of our larger one. This also works very well for, like, if we used a moss texture instead of a gravel texture, so it would look like it's growing just in the cracks of our larger stone. And if we wanted to, since we've got the strength adjustment, we could even pile up a whole bunch right here. Maybe turn the strength up. And then increase the overall strength of our height map. And now it looks like we've got kind of a pile of gravel here. And then we can even blend that out so as if it's now falling into the gaps as we go away from that pile. And it all blends in a very natural way, and it's very simple to set up. You can also smooth it out. One thing to note is if your texture changes too much between the different colors, it can start looking really unnatural. So you kind of want to make sure you keep it fairly subtle with the blending, otherwise it can get some weird results. Or if you do want that, you just have to be careful where you use it, just in case. Anyway, that's really all I've got for this tutorial. I'll have a project file for this, probably the first example I showed, on my Gumroad if you want to just download it and have a look at the really simple shader. I promise you can build it. It's really quick and simple to build, but use it for whatever you want, and I hope that helped. Alright, bye-bye. I also wanted to shout out real quick that if you're interested, I also make minis over on the website Thangs and sell them. So if you want to help support what I do other than these tutorials, go ahead and follow my link tree and check those out. I'll also link it in the description.